Hello everyone, I'm Boyd King at OSUIT, Institute of Technology, Okmulgee, Oklahoma, and we're in the air conditioning and refrigeration department. And I'm going to do my first video on introduction to motors, specifically talking about introduction and understanding shaded pole motors. I would say that's the basic motor, the very simplest motor that you can become familiar with, and it's also a building block, a platform that we can introduce other motors. And so we've already been through contactors, relays, starters. We've learned induction. We've learned about capacitance. And so a lot of the content that I'm going to be discussing here will pertain to induction especially. So we've looked at some videos already on introduction to DC motors. This is a single-phase AC motor, and what makes a shaded pole motor special is the shading coil. Okay, so if we look at how we would energize a shaded pole motor, some kind of control would send AC current through the winding, and it is a one-winding motor. One winding that is actually hooked up to line. There is a shading coil that acts like a secondary winding that we'll discuss and I'll show you in a minute, but it's basically, on a diagram, it's just shown as one independent winding. Okay, and when discussing motors in general, one of the most important concepts about all motors is understanding for that particular motor what makes it start differently than other motors. Some of them have capacitor start, some of them are just totally inductive start, and that's what we have here. We have a totally inductive start motor. It's very low starting torque, so you couldn't use a shaded pole motor for a compressor or even a fan that would need to deliver a lot of airflow. It's not strong enough. It doesn't have enough starting torque or running torque to do that. We're going to see shaded pole motors in unitary reach-in coolers. If you go to a grocery store in refrigeration boxes, the evaporator fans are small wattage motors, kind of like this right here. These are shaded pole motors. A lot of shaded pole motors come in a configuration like this, a little black box, where you can actually see the winding itself and the shading coil. Okay, so this is a pretty common configuration that you might see. So low starting torque, low running torque, and how does it start? That's what we're going to discuss heavily in all of our motors. How does it start? When we send current flow through the one winding, alternating current expands and collapses, creating a flux field, a magnetic wave that would pull or push at a specific time. And so if you had no shading coil on a shaded pole motor, if you energize this winding, it would just simply hum. It would not have a sense of direction. And so what a shading coil does is it gives it a sense of direction, and it helps with the starting torque. So looking at the shaded pole motor, the shading coil, you can see how this shading coil is offset here to the right, and it's not dead in the center of the shaft, and that will always tell you the direction that it's going to start. It's always going to start and run towards the shading coil. Now, some shaded pole motors are reversible. It totally depends on if you can pull the motor apart and pull the rotor out and turn it around and move it back in. That would be the only way that you could change the direction of a shaded pole motor. You cannot simply take the wires and change position of the wires to change the direction. You have to pull the motor apart, turn it around, and put it back in. Okay, so what does this shading coil do? It is simply a conductor that is next to an electromagnet. And when the electromagnet is energized with alternating current, expanding and collapsing, it expands and collapses across a secondary conductor, which induces a counter electromotive force, counter EMF, back into the circuit, which is an opposite sine wave, which causes basically like poles to attract, and that would give it its sense of direction and starting torque. So very straightforward motor, very simple to wire. We can identify these because they have two wires, no capacitor. There are some multi-speed shaded pole motors where they just have extended windings or one winding with different taps off of it. We will look at in future videos. Thank you a lot.